Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Andrew Fox, founder and CEO of Charge, a company dedicated to building the largest global network of EV charging, storage, and service stations for electric mopeds and e-scooters. In fact, Andrew was also an early investor in Lime scooters. Andrew, it's great to have you with us. Tell us about the micromobility revolution.
Well, thank you for having me. And, I caught the micromobility revolution in early 2018 and saw this unbelievable pace in which it went from 0 to over 100 markets internationally in a very, very short period of time. And it was a very simple device. The challenge was their Achilles heel was there was no infrastructure to support it. And it was like the dawn of this transportation revolution. And the fact is that doing infrastructure work is very unpopular. And so we kind of had this unenvious task that we were saying to the Lime guys, like, hey, the decay rate on a scooter, so how quickly it declines, is too rapid. You need to think about infrastructure. And they gave us kind of the cold shoulder, not because they didn't believe in what we were doing, but that wasn't their core mission. And so we, myself and my co-founder, we started a business around the infrastructure space, and we built a moat kind of in advance. And so we locked up a lot of real estate before we even announced our business intentions. And so in April of 2019, when we first came out with our first generation prototype, our expectation was that there was someone in some land already manufacturing these systems. And so we had a prototype and we're like, we'll manufacture this in China. The reality was nobody had begun manufacturing these things. And so then we had to accelerate and build go from prototype to manufacturing to winning our first major market, which was Paris.
And Andrew, it makes complete sense to me. And you can have all the EV product in the world that you want, but unless the infrastructure is there to support it and maintain it, it's kind of all for naught in my mind. So why have investors poured billions into micromobility startups in the last few years?
Well, I think it's like a lot of things. It's a follow the herd mentality. And in the follow the herd mentality, big automotive makers recognize that in densely packed cities, you need transportation alternatives. These were transportation alternatives. And I think that there's just the transportation space in general. If you have the ability to cut people's commute time and reduce emissions, then there's a huge opportunity. And so I think that that's why investors poured so much money into it in the beginning. I think now, as the market is maturing and because of the pandemic, a lot of people got to reevaluate, well, what's most important? Is the integrity of my community sidewalk more important to me than this future of transportation? And I think absolutely. We've grown now. We're in 19 countries. We're on a revenue run rate to about 500 million of revenue this year. So we're out of the gates. But the fact of the matter is, it's still the first inning of this ball game. And so there's all this stuff being figured out in this process.
What are some of the most interesting deals?
That's a good question. I think that the most interesting deals are sometimes the deals you don't do. And I think right now everybody's in a rush to do deals. I think the smartest people are focused on the right deals. I think we've announced a couple of weeks ago, we're aggressively going into the electric vehicle infrastructure market as well. I see a future that autonomous vehicles are self-charging themselves in the middle of the night. And so your vehicle, if you're a fleet, is picking itself up and going from A to B to a centralized charging location. I think there's a lot of value in the future of this real estate around off ramps and on ramps. If you think about autonomous vehicles, how they really need to kind of flow through traffic. So it's an exciting time to be in this transportation sector. It's like being in 1996, 97 in the internet space. Mm-hmm. You don't know exactly what's going to work. It's like mercury. You can't put your finger on it, but you know it's there. And it's the same thing in the EV space. You know it's going to evolve so quickly. You just don't know exactly where. I know in our space, the infrastructure side, as certain as I am, the sun's coming up tomorrow. You're going to need the infrastructure. And so we just focus on the unglamorous part of that.
I like the self-charging. It's almost like the analogy of a Roomba, right? It knows when it needs to charge and it goes back to its little home. And you had alluded to this earlier, but what was the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic to the segment? Did it accelerate any trends, or do you think there's going to be new trends in place as a result of how we're going to work and play going forward?
I think that so micromobility as a whole, as you know, is somewhat seasonal. And so in markets where seasonality didn't affect, you actually had people spending a longer period of time on micromobility devices going a further distance. Now, less people in the aggregate, but if you just look at those numbers as a whole, people were just pent up, and so they needed something to do, so they would just hop on one of those devices just to get out and have some time. In the future, I think most people are going to be mindful about getting on public transportation. And I advocate for public transportation. I think we fit kind of, you get off public transportation, you get on a micromobility device, you successfully dock and park it and go up to your commercial dwelling. But my feeling is that this time within the kind of pandemic or post-pandemic, the smart operators are getting profitable. They're figuring out that the US equity markets have melted up, but that doesn't mean that as a micromobility provider who's losing money, that well is going to continue to be there. And so I think you'll see infrastructure like ours, and you'll see a lot of, I think, new forms of the new form factor of electric bike, electric moped, electric scooter, and all to hopefully connect transportation deserts and help people get from A to B without so much congestion.
And Andrew, what are the challenges the micromobility world faces when it comes to regulation and city infrastructure? I would imagine there's that balance between private and
there was
public
none.
companies working together.
Yeah, so they started and there was basically no regulation. And so in certain markets, you had scooter Armageddon on every corner. And I kind of was like scratching my head post the investment in Lime and going, how is this possible? How are elected officials allowing this much clutter to cram up the sidewalks? And everybody was kind of just like, yeah, that kind of does make sense. And I was like, somebody has to have thought of our idea. I didn't think charge was an original idea. I presumed that someone was focusing on the infrastructure for this. It turned out we were a little early, and so no one had been focusing on it. But I think that there's a lot to be said about any industry that's this early, that you kind of have to break some eggs to make the omelet, and that's what you're seeing now is they're breaking eggs. A city is not a smart city by having scooter Armageddon all over the place. You need infrastructure like ours.
Yeah, and Andrew, to wrap up here, when we think about growth in the mobility market, where are the opportunities? Is it more regional? Is it just broad-based overall globally?
I mean, from the university town all the way up to the major metropolis, if it's done responsibly, it's going to be everywhere. This is here to stay, and you just need proper infrastructure. It's akin to having stoplights and stop signs. Once you put those stoplights and stop signs, this is here to stay. I think Lime is going to be a household name, as Bird and Voy and the guys that really get it right. And then in tertiary markets, there'll be little guys that are doing great things for their community by helping connect people transportation wise. And so I think you're going to see it in hundreds of markets. And I think that you'll see, companies like ours providing service around the ecosystem to make it effective.
All right, Andrew, we appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Have a great day. Thank you.